Welcome back, everybody. This is our podcast number 10. And
our final episode.
Yay! But welcome for joining us. Today we'll be talking about the deaf community.
Yes. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about with the deaf community is police interaction, which involves community interaction, being pulled over, and it involves being pulled over and also community interactions.
Just getting from point A to point B and how difficult that may be while being a deaf or hard of hearing person. Today, about 11.5 million Americans have some sort of hearing impairment, ranging from the difficulty in hearing conversations to total hearing loss. That's about 3.5% of the population. And
that information comes from census.gov. What is clear is that 3.5% doesn't sound like it's much of the community, but we know that 3.5% is enough that you will meet someone in your life who is part of the deaf community or is hard of hearing. And because of that, it's important for our police and just everyone in general to be aware of the deaf community and know how to communicate with those individuals.
Yes. And as you can tell, or as you can see in social media, there are many people who are trying to teach others or educate others about ASL, which is American Sign Language, or in some cases, the show Switch at Birth. Do you know what
I mean, I know the show. What are you going with?
There was a scene where Emmett was arrested.
I have not seen Switched at Birth. I only know about
Emmett, who is a fan of Daphne during Switch at Birth. Emmett was born deaf, so and I guess he was driving her or something, and he got arrested. But yeah, I will attach that.
Are you Emmett Bledsoe? Are you Emmett Bledsoe, sir? We have a warrant for your arrest. Drop that weapon, sir. Drop the weapon, sir. I said drop it! Trying to have resisting arrest to your charges, huh? Do not resist, sir. Come on, let's go. You got something to say, kid? Huh? Get in there.
So I think that video, while it was over dramatized, obviously, it is a TV show, but it really shows what we know happens for the deaf community when they're interacting with the police. There's frustration because they can't tell law enforcement officers what's happening.
Yes, and it's a good representation because it shows that this happens in everyday life. Yeah. And plus Switch at Birth came out in maybe 2010. So this is a good understanding of to understand what each side looks like from a police officer's perspective to a deaf person in the community.
And so some things that we came across in our research with this topic is that the Americans with Disabilities Act made it clear that officers need to take appropriate steps to effectively communicate with the deaf community. They are obligated to provide sign language interpreters or auxiliary aids when they can. And I think the reason that we have all of these examples of police brutality for deaf individuals is that they can't communicate that they're deaf. I think that is where the issue lays.
Yeah. I feel like the police has a job and they're executing that job, but it's just how would they execute it in that situation? I feel like we have the act, but there's nothing to help it, if that makes sense, in my opinion. And we can have a lot of these laws or rules and everything, but it depends on how people enforce it is how the community will understand.
And so some ways that could improve this situation for deaf or hard of hearing individuals is training for police officers on, you know, recognizing aggressive behaviors or, you know, non-aggressive behaviors, especially in the deaf community, and also just understanding a little bit of sign language. That goes a long way. Like when the guy in the video in Switched at Birth, the actor, he pointed to his ear, and the police officers didn't understand. But you know, if they could interpret that well, then there would have been, you know, less.
I feel like there's always has to be a communication first. They can't be all like, well, they have to be all big and bad and tough, but there's a silver lining where it's like, oh, you're deaf.
Yeah.
Or just a simple of just like, hello, like, I did that wrong, but it's hello. And like, I can do my name in sign language.
Yeah, so can I. Yeah.
I think it's the feeling of just having just the basics of just doing like the hello sign and
or like understanding I'm deaf. I think that is very important, because after that, you know, you can call for an interpreter or you can pass back a notepad, which is some of the recommendations that the ACLU came up with. So when communicating with deaf individuals, it's important to use whatever you can. So pen and paper, sign language if you know it, text messages, and visual aids. This is where those pamphlets that we talked about in class comes in. I thought those were genius, like really, because you point to all of these things that, you know, the questions are asking. I think every person who is part of the deaf community would benefit from having one of these.
Of course.
And in my research, I also found that there are decals that you can put on the back of your car, like deaf driver.
Yeah.
And that would also help because, you know, police officers, they could see that as they're walking up for the traffic stop and be like, okay, this is how I'm going into the situation, you know?
Yeah. But I just feel like, I want to say, like, the deaf community has always been seen, but I don't think, like, people have the right understanding.
Yes,
and like,
I agree.
I feel like for the parking decal or like the sticker on the back, wouldn't that like cause more of a ruckus because they have to show that they are deaf?
I see what you're saying. You know, maybe you wouldn't want to advertise to other drivers that you're hard of hearing. That could cause road rage or something.
But I like how you mentioned road rage, because it shows from the NASS, which is the National Highway. Oh, whoops, wrong one. The National Automobile Sampling System. It showed that it indicated that deaf and hard of hearing drivers are 1.5 to 9 times as likely to get to a serious injury or killed in a motor vehicle accident. But I feel like that's lower than an actual hearing a person getting into an accident, because they have distractions as of your technology. Well, if you're deaf, you're not even on your cell phone. You're looking at the road, at your mirrors.
Well, to be fair, I think the real issue when it comes to distracted driving is like texting and driving, and I think deaf people can participate in that. So one of the reasons that deaf or hard of hearing drivers could be more likely to be seriously injured could be that they can't hear upcoming roadblocks,
or like somebody's horn.
But overall, I think
I don't know either.
Some recommendations to help with the deaf community and police interactions with the deaf community, as we talked about before, the visual aids, pen and paper, knowing some sign language. But I think the deaf community is a community. It has a culture, a shared culture, and I think that police officers could benefit from diversity training.
And I feel like this is a trend that's going on throughout all of our podcast videos, is that more training.
Just more understanding.
It could be like an annual thing where they have to go and get training for how would you do it for different circumstances. And
or maybe they're required to take a diversity course at a college, at you know,
Something
community
small.
center.
I know, like, this may be big to some people, but some ideas can, like, get pushed out.
Yeah.
And change is slowly happening, as we can see.
100%, yeah.
As more and more people, more and more deaf people are going to juries and everything. But I feel like the most that we need to understand is that we need more interpreters.
Yes.
And that comes from people wanting to be an interpreter. Because I feel like people just don't want the need of learning a second language.
Yeah, or the people that do know that second language want a different job.
Yeah.
Because I think my old Spanish teacher, she was an interpreter for social services and for the courts. And she talked about how, you know, she liked the job and she loved Spanish language, but she was working as a contractor and she has diabetes, so she really needed to be a full-time worker. So she decided to not be an interpreter anymore, and she joined the school just because the job didn't fit for her.
Yeah.
So I think treating interpreters better would also help in this situation.
Yeah.
So, for the very last time, this has been Once Upon a Crime with Iolani Mangoba and Bethany Racette.
Thank you for joining us for these 10 podcasts, and thank you for Dr. Reed for allowing us to do this.
Yes. It's been fun. Goodbye.